Hey everyone, I am Alice for those of you who don't know me. I am a brand new CODA, just found out less than a week ago that I passed the NBCOT exam. Um, I did have a fairly high score. I scored 542 on my first try, and I did have a few people reach out to me and ask for some advice and tips on how to increase their score, or any advice I could give on taking the exam. So instead of replying individually, I just decided to make this video. So first of all, I am not employed by NBCOT or AOTA. I am just a student who took this exam and just wanted to share some tips with you. So take what you can from it and throw out the rest. So my background is that I have been a massage therapist for about 22 years. I did that part-time while raising my kids and went back to school to become an EMT, which I've been working at doing for the last 3 years. So I do have a little bit of experience in taking national boards since I did for massage therapy and EMT. But this exam is not really like either of those. The EMT exam was extremely difficult. It was more like what I've heard the HESI is like, where it's an adaptive test. The questions are tricky and the test changes depending on how you're answering questions. This test is not like that. It's more straightforward, but you do have to understand how to answer the questions. So I did attend a small private technical school in Virginia. It is an accelerated program. It's 12 months, and that's not including your prerequisites. So we were the first online cohort to go through this school. We did 8 months of classroom, and everything was online except for 2 weekends a month we went to school for our practicals and hands-on stuff. So 8 months of class and then 4 months of field work. Of course, our field work was interrupted by COVID. So we were supposed to graduate in June, but I didn't finish everything until the end of September. So looking at trying to schedule my exam, I wanted to do it as soon as possible. By the time everything was done with my transcripts and everything, I didn't get to take it till the end of October. But it ended up being a good thing because it kind of forced me to study longer than I probably would have. So when I went to approach this exam, I wasn't exactly sure where to start. There's obviously a huge book knowledge component, that's going to test what you've learned throughout school. I was a very good student. I paid good attention. I read all my chapters. I did not feel like I needed to study concepts or things as much as maybe someone else might need to. So I really wanted to learn how the test, is set up, how to answer the questions. So I just started taking tests. So I did do the therapy ed course, and I took my first exam and got a 64%. So that sounds kind of horrible, but they say if you're scoring in the 60s, you're probably on the right track. So I felt like the test was extremely challenging. The questions were tricky, and I didn't really understand why I got so many wrong. So I started looking up the rationales because they are listed. Every single question is listed in the back of the book. It tells you why the answer is right or wrong. And that helped me a lot to start to begin to think like the people who made the test. So figuring out what they're looking for, what they're asking, and then being able to come up with the answer that they have chosen. So as I did the tests, I also started writing down concepts, terms, definitions, whatever, diagnoses that I either just didn't recognize, or I was like, oh, I remember learning something about that, but I need to review it. So I kept a list, and then from there, like for instance, I got a bunch of questions about spinal cord injuries. So I was like, oh, wow, I don't remember what someone with a C5 injury can do. So I went on OT Miri, started watching videos. OT Rex was another good one. And then I would take notes when I watched those videos. And being a visual learner, that's what worked really well for me. There's podcasts that you can use, knowing what your learning style is and being able to find what works for you is going to be very helpful. So after doing all that, I did purchase the NBCOT study pack, which I found extremely helpful. I felt like those questions were a lot closer to the actual exam than the therapy ed questions. Now, the therapy ed questions, I mean, they will challenge you definitely to start critically thinking. So don't discount that. But the NBCOT study pack exams were more close to the actual exam. I started scoring higher on those. I think I got like a 499 on the pretest, 520, 490 something, and then 520 were my final exams that they had on the practice exams. Now, some of them will give you the answers. And so that was helpful. Again, just learning, the rationales, why certain answers are correct. And then a lot of the exams did not have answers. So you don't know which ones you got wrong or why you got them wrong. But it's good practice to take the test. And they have, let's see, there's a game on there with soccer or whatever. And then there's flashcards, which were extremely helpful. Definitely, there was tons of terms on there just to help refresh your memory. Because if you're asked a question about a specific word that you don't know, how are you ever going to be able to figure out which intervention is going to be most appropriate for it? So that was definitely invaluable. So the whole second part of taking the exam is figuring out how to answer the questions. This was why I believe that I scored so high on this exam. So you need to learn how to break down the questions. If you can't identify exactly what the question's asking, there's no way you can come up with the correct answer. So breaking down the question, I would read each question at least twice, making sure that I paid attention to all the keywords. So if something said initial, first, what comes next, what's the most appropriate intervention? I'm trying to think. You got to identify what stage of treatment that they're talking about in the question. So if it says you are an OTA and you are contributing to an OT's initial evaluation of a client, and blah, 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 whatever, what is the next appropriate thing to do? You have to realize that they're asking for what would you be doing in the initial treatment. Now, of course, COTAs don't provide an initial evaluation, but they can contribute to it based off of their competency. So if you're looking at the answers and one of them's an intervention and one of them has something to do with discharge and one of them has something to do with like a home eval or something, you know that you need to look for an answer that has something to do with something that would happen during an initial eval. So don't get caught up in a diagnosis, a symptom. There's things in that question that might not even be important to the answer. Another example would be, you're a COTA treating a child who has some XYZ diagnosis and they have all these different barriers and blah, blah, blah. And the OT has a goal of increasing social participation. Now, which of these interventions would be most appropriate to address that goal? So I found that when I was taking my practice exams that a lot of times I would get focused on the diagnosis. What is associated with that diagnosis? What are the barriers that are listed there? What would be a good intervention to use with a child that had this? but the goal is social participation. So there is a feature in the exam on the computer that you can highlight keywords. So I did this many times, especially on the longer questions. I would highlight the words next, initial, intervention, or the goal. What is the goal? So maybe the child has very poor postural control, but the goal is social participation. So when you're looking at the answers, which one of those answers will address that goal? And if it has something to do with addressing the barrier too, then that's even better, right? So maybe one of the answers is play a board game with peers while straddling a bolster or something where you could work on postural control and the social participation goal at the same time. The other thing that you need to look for is it a safety question? If it has anything to do with safety, or if safety is in question, that is your number one priority, no matter what it is. It's not even almost important what the goal is if the patient safety is going to be an issue. So safety first, always. The other thing is the crossout feature that is available with the exam. So you can eliminate certain choices. In school, we practice this, reading the question. Usually you can eliminate 2 answers right away. And then you're left with 2 similar answers that could both be right. So those 2 similar answers, you go back, you read the question again. Which one of those would be most appropriate and is addressing the goal, answering the question that they're asking. So being able to identify exactly what they are asking is honestly like the key to this. I'm not going to break out any specific questions because I really don't want to get sued. But, if you have a question about a certain exam question that you've seen or something like that, maybe I can help you walk through the rationale as to how they got to that answer. I would encourage you to keep taking practice exams, because the more you take them, the more you learn. So don't be afraid to fail these exams, because you're learning every time that you take one. Every wrong answer I got taught me something about how to get to that answer. And as far as my experience on test day, I took a break about halfway through my exam. I brought a snack and some water because I knew that I was going to need that break. And I kept marks on my time to make sure that I had the time to go take that break. But about halfway through, I did go and have a snack and some water and just went to the bathroom, collect myself. And that really helped keep my blood sugar up. And I finished my exam in about 3 hours and 10 minutes. And, I marked maybe about 30 questions for review. And at the end, I went through each one, and I think I changed one answer. And the only reason I changed it was because when I reread the question, it was one of those that said, based on the OT's goal of blank, which intervention would you choose? And I realized that I had chosen an intervention based off the patient's diagnosis, not off of the goal. So I did change one answer. But yeah, that's about it that I can think of. Just focusing on how to take this exam, how to answer the questions, was key to me more than even the book knowledge, because trust yourself, you do have the book knowledge. And just being able to break down the question, take your time, and come up with the most appropriate answer. So I just want to encourage you all that you can and you will pass this exam, and reach out to me if there's anything I can do to help. And good luck.